right, we can begin our session. Welcome everyone to this morning panel. So in the next 45 minutes, we will be discussing algorithmic management. That is increasingly used across many sectors, but today in particular, we're going to discuss Q-commerce. At the same time, we're going to focus on job crafting behaviors as a psychological meta tactic and collective technique in coping with growing demands in the workplace. The definition of the working management is quite simple, and it's a set of mathematical metrics which can be virtually used in any workplace and manage the routine of workers, including the break times. So this style of management can be used for planning, staffing, coordinating, commanding, and controlling. While the companies use the algorithm for optimization, of course, efficiency and maximization of profit, we also need to think about how algorithmic management influences organization of work, workers' rights, and the social dialogue in general. What is more important to emphasize, this type of management lacks empathy and fails to account all nuances of human behavior. And specifically, this extreme version of algorithmic management is well practiced in Q-commerce, where algorithms are fully in charge of allocating tasks and in many circumstances, tracking the performance. So the leading questions today of our session is whether platform companies can implement certain changes in algorithmic system to make the work more enjoyable and meaningful. And is the job crafting as the concept can be useful also for the social partners? And can job crafting be the answer to the current struggle the workers face at the moment? So let me introduce our panel today. I will start with Isabell Lippert, who is academic researcher from Technical University in Dresden, and her doctoral research focuses on algorithmic management in traditional organizations. Then we have Blaz Gyoha, who represents Austrian Trade Union Federation. Blaz has been involved in platform work already for many years, and specifically organizing platform workers in Vienna. And finally, we have Robert Peters, who is currently the head of foresight and labor research at the Institute of Innovation and Technology in Berlin. So let's start our discussion with Isabell. Can you tell us more about your research and how job crafting is relevant to understand algorithmic management and experience of algorithmic management?
Yes, so thank you for the introduction. So when I was thinking of doing research on job crafting, it was mainly motivated by the basic idea to see that actually workers in the quick commerce are doing this job voluntarily, right? So it's a low threshold of working. You don't need that much papers to work there. Many people also say, I like having no supervisor. So the basic idea was to see what they particularly like in their job. And also I was talking to 16 workers from Lieferando. So we consider Lieferando as part of the quick commerce. And maybe to explain that shortly, why do we say quick commerce? Because we refer to a sector that is increasing, right? So it's not only Lieferando, so there are also some other services that refer to this particular fast form of delivery where you actually try to satisfy customer cravings within 1 hour or even faster. So that's why we refer to this quick commerce. And so to see what they particularly like is maybe job crafting is one form to explain that. And so job crafting means that by the end of the day, almost every worker and every employee is doing job crafting because it means that you try to design your job, right? You try to you alter your task, for instance, if you do them faster or slower, or you try to interact with people more or less, or you try to sort of engage in a cognitive process, like for delivery workers, for instance. Lots of people told me, oh, actually, I like the job because I get paid for cycling. So, and then I can combine my hobby with my work. So that was a really frequently mentioned quote from the workers. And of course, there are also some other behaviors, especially in terms of algorithmic management. Maybe you heard of algo activism, which means that you try to resist the algorithms, or some even sort of behave in a way that could be resort to a workaround, right? They put their phones into flight modes, but you have to distinguish these behaviors from job crafting, because it is said that job crafting has a positive outcome. And from my own research, sort of it is estimated, or it's predicted that algorithmic management is here to stay. And I think it's important to emphasize the positive aspects, especially on the worker side, because the structural changes, they really need a long time, right? So if you are thinking of fair payment or increased work security and so on, I think it's much more important to focus on the positive aspects that should be strengthened. And then this is actually, from my point of view, especially in the on the individual level of the workers.
Thank you. Since you mentioned that algorithmic management here to stay, my question to Robert, in the area of human resources, how is job crafting understood and how it is relevant to talk today?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to shed light on the broader picture here. So what we are witnessing during the last decades is wave after wave of digital transformation, and with each new fancy tool, with each new system, with each new technology, there has been the same promise. The promise that it would make work easier for people working with these technologies. But in fact, what happens is that mental load is piling up again and again, and it seems to be a kind of the unwritten law of digital transformation that it happens again and again. And so we have to talk about this, especially because we are now 2024 in the middle of the next wave of digital transformation of the world of work. And we are talking about generative artificial intelligence. And of course, this kind of technology will also bring comparable effects for workers with it. And in parallel to that, you're asking me for the perspective of HR, of the HR world. HR professionals seemingly start to understand that this might be a very, very important issue to tackle. And we saw that last week at Zukunftsforschung, for example, in Cologne, Europe's biggest HR trade fair. There, the opening panel was titled "The Era of Great Exhaustion." And the discussion on this trade fair was all about how can we cope with quiet quitting, quiet vacationing, and the rising problems of mental health in the workforce of the companies. This rising awareness is because this is a very, very costly factor. The Deutsche Institut für Wirtschaftsforschung in Cologne showed in a recent study that German companies lose more than 76 billion euros a year due to effects of increased sickness caused by mental illness, among others. So we have a very, very important cost factor here for companies, and this number of 76 billion euros is just the number directly linked to paid leave during illness. So we have many other factors producing way higher numbers here. So when the numbers are clear, I would argue we have to find solutions and talk more about how can we create a healthier and more sustainable work environment. And exactly this point is where job crafting comes into play. And this is because there is a direct link between job crafting and health. This has been shown by a study of Barmer Ersatzkasse and the University of St. Gallen. And they asked employees, and they answered that and the result was that employees who are engaged in job crafting rate their own health 11% higher than employees that are not involved in engaged in job crafting. And so here is the exciting part on the problem side, and on the solution side, the interesting part from my perspective is that database technologies can play a crucial role in supporting job crafting. And we could show this in a recent study we conducted at the Institute for Innovation and Technology for the Federal Ministry for Labor and Social Affairs. And we could show that database technologies actually can contribute to transforming workplaces, helping employees thrive both mentally and physically.
So what we see with the priority should be mental health, but what are the organizational challenges in having job crafting as an employee-driven technique?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Yes. The organizational challenges are mainly on the, let's say, they are two-folded. So we have on the one hand, we have the problem with complexity of these systems and the data structure in companies, which is in many cases separated in silos. So we have no interoperability with very important data sources in the companies. And the other reason is a kind of lazy thinking, a lazy mindset on data protection. Let me go a bit more into detail with the first part. When we argue that data-based technologies like algorithmic management hold immense potential for people to shape and design their own work environment, their own work processes, then we have to ask, why do companies do not use this kind of technologies? And we showed in our recent future report HR Tech, presented last week at Zukunftsforschung in Cologne, that most HR departments are focusing on automation of standard processes, not helping employees in any way. So they try to be more efficient in their bread and butter business, you can say. So, and the reason why. We also asked the reason, why do you not focus on technologies, for example, that can help develop talents and help people to create their own individual work environment? And the answer was, yeah, there are some reasons. First of all, data sources often need to be tapped or are unlocked in the companies. If data already exists and is collected, it's frequently tied up in proprietary silos. So this is a kind of technical and governance problem. We have an interoperability problem, and of course, most HR departments in many companies responsible for this kind of innovation do not have the competencies to develop that kind of innovative project. So the bottom line on the complexity side, from my point of view, would be systems that can be used for support. Job crafting are so complex that we cannot just buy them off the shelf. So, and then there is, from my perspective, a kind of laziness of thinking, lazy mindset when it comes to data protection. There seems to be a kind of common understanding in many companies. Then, as soon as personal data is involved, this is a no-go. But I think this is a huge misunderstanding, because the problem is companies seem to see data protection as an obstacle, and of course blaming works councils to be a kind of innovation barrier. But in fact, many works councils we talk to or actively support the usage of employee data when this kind of usage really supports and is beneficial to the employees. So, and we also found in our studies some cases where the employer side was the barrier, because, for example, they were not able or willing to give the and to allocate the necessary resources. So, my argument would be. Employers should view works councils more as a kind of partner in crime when it comes develop innovative HR innovations, for example, to support to support job crafting. And my last point would be a glimpse to the technological side, because as there is fear of on data protection, I do not understand why we do not make use of the technologies at hand to overcome data protection issues. For example, we already have distributed data storage. We already have federated machine learning. We already have differential privacy. Why don't we start to create a responsible data governance in each company that helps the company to innovate their HR processes and their management, and in the same side, helping people to create their own healthier and more sustainable work environment.
Thank you. Lars, the questions to you now. What can be the role of trade unions in this process, and how job crafting is in fact relevant for the work of trade unions?
Yes, I have to say that I was also a bike messenger back in the days, even like in the previous time where there was no Google Maps and so on. And then in those 2015-16 years when this platform economy with Lieferando and Fondora and this popped up, and I also tried this.
Did you have a paper map?
I had a paper map actually here, and I always took it out and, okay, which street should I take and so on. It was a total different working experience, and it was a much easier and totally different when Google Maps actually arrived. But my point is that I really saw this development, you know, from going from a pager to getting to an address, moving to a phone with the app where you are like managed with those algorithmic management system, where you are actually following the rules, those micro tasks that are given by the app. And the unions itself in general in this whole like platform economy, and with it also Q-commerce, algorithmic management and so on, play a significant role, because from my perspective, how everything started, we were like a grassroots movement, you know, working for the company Fondora. So that's in Germany, that's Delivery Hero. And we were always like proactive, okay, how can we make our individual working experience better? So job crafting, and how can we also do this like for the collective, you know? And then the idea of works councils comes up, because then you can negotiate company agreements, and then the next step is having a collective agreement and so on, where you actually define some rules for the whole sector. And in general, the unions play here a significant role, like also with us. They supported us, they gave us the resources, the knowledge, that we could actually develop our ideas in what should like a collective agreement for Austria look like. Because Austria back in 2020, it was actually globally the first collective agreement for bike couriers. And it was great to work together with the union and bring in our ideas. So I think unions play a significant role. We also see this now with the platform directive, because we should not forget, if we talk about the platform economy and the Q-commerce and, you know, algorithmic management, we always talk about also the working conditions, which is very important for us. And we want, you know, fair working conditions, fair pay and so on. And, you know, our bigger problem, the biggest problem of union was this, you know, false classification of workers. Like Lieferando, okay, they're real employees, but a lot or the majority of riders, so to say, they're not real employees, they're freelancers, so they're not covered by labor law or collective agreements, so on. So the working conditions for us as a collective are very important. But then going back to my experience on an individual level, you're mentioning, you know, in your study that I see another meaning, you know, doing sports, cycling around and so on. Yes, this is true, because I also saw it like that, but back in the days, I was, so to say, not primarily dependent on this income. So I could choose, okay, I'm writing like 3 hours per shift and 3 shifts, so I can listen to podcasts and enjoy that. But if you have to do this, I don't know, 40 hours, or we have some, like a lot of people who have to earn the income, and they do 200 hours, 300 hours, you know, then this relationship to job crafting and experience in working condition changes, you know. And how can we as a union then have an impact and create like good working conditions for all? Because like, I have to say, back in 2016, 15, when I was doing this for Foodora and comparing this to now, back then the working conditions were much better and the work crafting aspects was much easier because there was a garage, you know, we could meet in the garage. You could even have the possibility to, I don't know, repair your bikes and so on. And it was more like a, you know, community feeling with the company. But this totally changed it. And now it's more like people see it. There are still people who like to do it, but you know, they see it as a job where they have the feeling that they are constantly surveilled, exploited. And also, as you mentioned, you know, those workarounds or resistance steps or algo activism, what you called, we also did that, you know, how often I turned down the GPS and so on. But this, the company then quickly figured out, okay, they tried to manipulate that. And then they, you know, there was like threats like, okay, if you disable your GPS, you're being like punished, either you're fired whatsoever. So we see that the company, I don't know, in my experience, they're not so proactive in talking with the workers, okay, how can we make your work experience better? There are forums, there are exchanges, workers bring ideas in, but then they're not, you know, implemented or they're not heard so much. So this is like from our perspective where we think like it's important to have a collective effort which has then a bigger impact into shaping those working conditions than just looking at the individual level, you know. And also here the question is, you mentioned, you know, the positive aspect of job crafting, positive aspect on an individual level, yes, but also for the company, in what terms, you know, like what does it mean?
Yeah, but I know that, for instance, I find that some workers establish networking channels, right? They set up WhatsApp groups or Telegram or you name it. So they try to engage in social, so we call it social expansion. That's a very scientific term maybe, but it actually means that in terms of job crafting, you try to reduce your feelings of isolation, right? To try to get some social support. And actually they have sort of the power to do that from their hearts, from their inside, right? Because they are social people, and that's why I call them sort of networker. I also find that some sort of act as, we call that advocate for riders, because they try to engage in the works councils. Some of them are official, some of them are rather unofficial, and they indeed, actually, they organize. In Berlin, I know that they organize these bike repair cafes and so on. So all these initiatives are going on, but I think it's first in bigger cities where they have where they are better organized, or the group of riders is just bigger. And maybe they also know they could have an easier option to change the service, because some of them, it's not unusual that they work for several services or worked for another service before. So that's a very common behavior, and especially in smaller cities, they're sort of really lonely. So that's why it's important to strengthen these people, especially in those smaller cities. That's what I observed.
Since job crafting is the employer behavior to cope with the working conditions and certain tasks, but how certain job crafting practices can be more accepted by the companies, how it can be physically implemented, whether it can be implemented in the application. Do you know any examples of it?
Yeah. So that's actually the next project I'm aiming for. So we are planning to conduct a study where we play with job crafting interventions. So research is also looking into job crafting interventions, which means that you actually teach your employees to engage in job crafting, because it is shown to increase work engagement and especially organizational commitment. Because the workers I was talking with, that were about 20 people, said, I'm working here for 5 years, 8 years, whatever. So in my sample, I had an average tenure of 4.8 years, which is quite a lot for this sector, because actually some of them do not survive their probation period, or they quit before. And even one worker, he had a really bad accident, and he was over 50, and he still worked for Lieferando. So that was a really fascinating character to talk to. So as it is shown to increase organizational commitment, work engagement, like they are really proud of their kilometers by the end of the day. I thought it would be interesting to use the app for motivating messages. For instance, right? You get a motivating push notification, or you get sort of, I don't know, like you write, come on, just like, I mean, okay, you have to differentiate, because by the end of the day, that's also algorithmic nudging, right? So you try to convince the worker to behave in a special way, which is also sort of aiming for own benefits of the company. But this is an idea sort of to increase the familiarity with job crafting, and that's where the works councils sort of come in, because I think they're really important, and the unions when it comes to negotiating these aspects, right? Because from a technological way, it's really easy to implement these motivating push messages, or to suggest any job crafting behaviors. Right, so it's just about, I think, convincing the employer to implement this, right? Because the developers, by the end of the day, they have to implement this in the apps. But I think it's about like convincing them of the how it maybe increases work engagement, and then I think they need strong arguments, and I think from our research we can deliver these arguments, and also why people are motivated. Although these really tough working circumstances, and I don't want to neglect that this is a really hard sector, it's a really hard place to work for. But as I said, most of them are there voluntarily, so they actively choose to work there, and most of them I talked to told me that they are really satisfied. So of course it could be a sort of a bias in my sample, but I think it's important to strengthen the positive aspects without neglecting the negative aspects, but sometimes it's not so easy to change the structural negative aspects. That's why I think that job crafting interventions is a nice next step to use the technology in a positive way, not only about directing workers, evaluating workers, or whatever it is used for all the time, tracking every 15 seconds, but also to in a way that's in the interest of the worker, which is currently not the case. So that's, from my point of view, the next step when it comes to the usage of worker-friendly, if it's possible, algorithmic management.
Question to you: is it possible to have ethical platforms and workers-friendly algorithmic management?
Yeah. From my point of view, it is possible, and here I do agree with Isabell. Like from a technical perspective, so much could be done. For example, like you said, those, let me say, positive nudging, but also like, for example, the presentation of data, and we were talking a bit of data and data rights. In the app there is some data, some stats that are stated, but there's still like a big asymmetry of information, what the company collects and what you as a rider get. And also this data that is represented in the app is not like, from our point of view, like the full data, and even the access to this data, because we as a unions, we also try to get access to this data, to analyze to models, and to see and make a representation to the worker. Okay, look, this is the data what we analyze, from your representative perspective, and this is what the company is telling you. Is this correct, or are they hiding something? Again, like from our experience, Corona times, there were like digital tips and so on. By end of the month, somebody just got an email and said like, oh, you got like 10 euros of digital tips. But is this actually true? Because, how could they know? Or like, for example, in many like platform models, the workers are paid by kilometers, and same, you did like 20 kilometers. And then we have riders who use their own apps, and then they compare the kilometers, and there's a difference, So that is also why data for us as unions is important. And many times, from my experience, we were proactive approaching the company. Hey, let's try to tweak a bit, this model that it's more in our favor. For example, I don't know, like back in 2016, the radius was like, radius where you could pick or drop an order. It was like 2.5 kilometers, in Vienna. Now it's like 6. And a lot of times they didn't even communicate that they increased the radius. We were just like, okay, now I can cycle 5 kilometers to pick up our order. And if you're employed and paid by the hour, okay, this is not a problem. But if you're paid by delivery, this is a problem. And then in the example, what happened in Vienna, people were then organizing, because this is a very, very important aspect, and this feel of a community, and we can do something. And it was interesting that people like with immigration background from Middle Eastern countries, they were really organizing and they were doing demos. You can't call them strikes because they are freelancers. And they were pushing to change the model to be paid by the kilometers because, okay, the kilometers increased, the order payment was the same. The company did that, but now, months later, we see that this was actually a negative impact because now they even earn less per order than before. Yeah. Because before, again, as an example, where they had like double order, they get like double payment. Now they have a double order, but they just get the kilometer from restaurant, first customer, second customer. So this is not double payment, you know. So much could be done like on the technical sense, you know, but companies, they are giving the possibilities to express your ideas, but, you know, they don't implement barely any of them, you know. Yeah. Okay.
I felt that you wanted to respond, and I have another question for you before you respond. Do you think there should be any governmental initiatives in terms of the data governance?
Yes, but I guess we have to think about very, very, very carefully whether this should be a regulatory answer or another kind of policy answer. And I would like to learn later more about your experience, because I was wondering, do you get actually access to the data, and to what extent do you know which data you have no access to? So what are your unknown unknowns when you are assessing the data of these kind of platforms? But to answer your question, I guess the million euro question is, how can we convince companies actually to promote and to be more active and progressive in terms of job crafting and changing algorithmic decision making in a way that it helps to support job crafting. And ultimately, please do not kill the messenger, but my perspective is companies will not respond to primarily ethical arguments. Mm-hmm. So my perspective is we have to find arguments to convince companies in a way that we can, let's say, make a case for the business case. Yeah? So we have to find arguments why it is, when it is economically beneficial for companies to be more engaged and proactive in terms of job crafting in the context of algorithmic management. And when we would have this kind of evidence, and from my perspective, there is so much research you and your colleagues are doing, but I guess a small research gap might be, what is the economic impact on the companies when they are more engaging in job crafting? So if we would have this evidence for this is economically beneficial for the companies, this, from my point of view, would be the game changer for convincing companies. So, and when you are asking for governmental initiatives, I would argue, let's focus on this aspect. For example, the Federal Ministry for Labor and Social Affairs would be in the position to fund research project to investigate the economic impact of job crafting. So that would give us as researchers the opportunity to investigate this, and in case we find evidence for that it is economic beneficial, I guess the workers, I'm pretty sure the workers would benefit from this when we could spread this knowledge. But we don't have this evidence, and I find this is one of the main problems we have.
Excellent. So we have 10 minutes left, and I see already the first hand. So the floor is open, and we will need assistance for the microphones. So we have the first question here, and the other question is at the back.
Thank you very much for your talk. I have a question to Robert Peters, and because I was wondering, when you designed the title for the talk, you came to a point talking about algorithmic management. And the problem, I think now then you were talking about a mitigation possibility to mitigate the problem of algorithmic management, but just of a part through job crafting. Because the problem of algorithmic management is that it leads to workload compression. People have to work more because the algorithm enforces it on their will and on their workload. That they work more, they have more pressure, they work faster, and they are alienated and heteronomy through, by design, through algorithms and the software apps that prescribe the workload to people and assign it to people. So to this problem, you were mitigating and talking about the 10% solution, meaning, oh, if people draft their job, design their task by themselves, oh, they are more motivated and they like it more. But you're not dealing with the problem, you're dealing with the symptom, and the symptom is people having more to work, faster, maybe even earn less money, as we had heard from the example from Austria, and you try to mitigate this through the problem. So you were not working on the essential question, that people are more alienated, more pressure, more workload compression, and more exploited, that was also mentioned. So I'm very interested how you would react to the question, how do you think the job crafting can help to avoid the workload and the work pressure, and how to avoid the more exploitation that is coming with the algorithmic management?
Question for me? I would argue, first of all, I'm on your side in this, and I was also struggling with the idea of some years ago with this term algorithmic management, because from my perspective, I usually talk more about database technologies than algorithmic management, because of course this is maybe somehow the bigger picture. I would argue that, let's say, working around little changes in algorithms in the Q-commerce business will not lead to any real progress. We should go 1 to 2 steps further and ask the employees, what do you need so that the overall experience, your overall daily business, is more suitable to your needs. And I think in other sectors, we are a step further here. So, as we heard, it is very difficult for the unions, to organize labor, to organize the workforce, to unite them and to give them a united voice. When we are talking to industry associations and to workers' unions in the industry sector, we have a kind of different experience, and that's what I refer to when I refer to this HR trade fair last week in Cologne. Of course, there are not the companies from the Q-commerce business, but it leads me to my last point again. My opinion is we will not overcome this issue you are talking about in such a precisely and very, very understandable way when we are not making the case for the question, how can companies economically benefit from this? And this can always also means that we have to take regulatory actions. But to be honest, there are also other sectors where people struggling with almost the same problems. Look at the retail sector. The retail sector, when we talk about franchise chains, for example, there are also people which do have very little access to fundamental workers' rights in the daily business. I do not mean on the paper. Yes, I do not. I mean in reality. So I would be on your side in this point, and we have to take a bigger look on the overall work experience people face in this kind of jobs. And from that perspective, I'm not so optimistic.
Maybe to add something small, a small note here, if it's okay. So the question of this panel was actually about how can I have meaningful work in this hard environment, right? So, and I found, of course, some spots that I just argued here, and I know that this is sort of provocative because some writer or a writer that is really exhausted and I'm asking them about his job crafting behavior, of course he will say, are you crazy? But by the end of the day, so my mission in the research is really about trying to strengthen these small aspects that we are not aware of by the end of the day, right? And especially as algorithmic management is also increasing towards other sectors. So I know that Amazon also uses algorithmic management, especially in a warehouse, in a really not so good way, which also leads to de-skilling of warehouse workers and so on. So of course we have to talk about that, and I know that researchers are also aware of this, but my research, and that was sort of the idea of the panel derived from, is about these individual level behaviors from workers.
Thank you. We have another question.
Also, again, for Dr. Peters. So I can acknowledge the argument that was made here, which has the challenges that were mentioned by the previous question about employee-friendly kind of algorithms. But have the studies that you've been doing also, however, also seen maybe perhaps like lazy data protection from a company side and a works councils or union representations as checks on this by considering employee interests to minimize unnecessary surveillance? It might be that, yes, there could be some positives of worker-driven improvements, but do we also have to consider exactly how those worker-driven improvements are done?
Could you rephrase the question? I didn't get it. Sorry.
Is there also perhaps any aspects that you've looked into, case studies of any lazy data protection from a company side, and any works council or union parts that have a check on this by considering employee interests that could minimize unnecessary surveillance?
Of course, there are so many cases out there, and this is in many companies a very huge problem. But when I'm talking about this lazy mindset in terms of data protection, I do not mean that I do not talk about companies which are not aware of the necessity of dealing with personal data in a responsible manner. I'm talking about companies which, for example, have implemented very strongly and very effective data protection measures, for example, also together with their works councils. And starting from these companies and coming from these companies, we in our research hear many voices saying, okay, when we try to find innovative solutions, for example, for job crafting or developing talents and so on, then we have the obstacle of data protection. And my argument would be that a strong data protection do not have to be an obstacle for finding innovative ways to deal with employee data. So no, I have no intention to argue for lowering that kind of barriers. I'm arguing, hey, companies, you do not have to fear data protection. You can deal with it, and you can find a way together with the Works Council to implement data-based innovations which supports and serves the employees.
Blaz, I see you nodding, and we have only 1 minute left. Would you like to respond to Dr. Peters?
About data protection?
Yes.
Yeah.
1 minute.
Yeah, I agree. Like data protection in general, like it is important, but access to data, for example, as I said, from an individual worker perspective, but also the union, they could easily incorporate a button where with the button you could get all the data. Because how do we get the data? We actually use the GDPR and we make data requests that they transfer the data. But how do we get the data? Not a lot of times, the data is easy to read, it's smashed up and so on. So there's also this impact. And if they would be more cooperative, from both sides, it could be like much different, yeah. But there are cases, for example, like Uber in Geneva, but there was also a court case and so on where they actually did implement, a button, okay, you can download and then you can analyze and see what's happening. But this data is then also important for later, if there are like, I don't know, court cases because the payment wasn't like correct and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of possibilities. Yeah, I have to close.
It's 11 o'clock. I'm so sorry, and we have to close this session. Thank you so much. And we started with very different perspectives, and I'm very glad that I can see some throughout discussion we had very good development and agreement points. Thank you so much, and we close the session now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.